Welcome back to True Story with John Gibson. Today's guest is Dr. Jamie Marich. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Glad to be here, John. Thanks for having me.
Completely my pleasure. So I'm currently enamored, totally enthralled. I don't even know the best adjective to assign it. But with your book, Transforming Trauma with Jiu-Jitsu, or through Jiu-Jitsu, right? And I just would love to start there and then talk more about you on a higher level. And you are like, at least in my opinion, the foremost expert in trauma. I mean, you're certainly, in my opinion, in my world,
I think
certainly, you certainly are. So I definitely want to pick your brain and talk about the path that led there. But let me stick to basics first. Transforming trauma with jujitsu.
yeah, and I
How
understand.
did you embark on this?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I understand you had my co-author and good friend Anna on in your
Yeah.
previous episode, and uh, yeah, I just adore her and adore the path that we have followed together to be able to put this book together, because we're both mental health professionals, both
Mhm.
specialize in trauma,
Mhm.
who discovered that jujitsu was very much a missing link for us. Since this is a solo interview, I guess I'll stick to my path with it. That
Yeah.
I have always in my life been drawn to anything expressive. As a child, it was performing on stage with dance and drama and music. And when I began my counseling career, it was really through the expressive arts because I began as an English teacher in Croatia and Bosnia Herzegovina after the war. And it was there that I learned about how trauma survivors responded much better to expressive modalities, even
Mm.
in learning English, than just doing worksheets and bland stuff out of the book. And so, when I began my own counseling training, which was also born out of my own lived experience with healing from addiction and trauma, I just saw how well how authentic I felt teaching people expressive arts and how people connected, and then using embodiment methods to assist people in reconnecting with their body because trauma could really divorce us from connection to the body.
Yes.
And I mean, it was initially dance and expressive arts and yoga that did it for me. And I always had an intrigue with martial arts because it made a lot of good sense to me why certain trauma survivors would find it helpful. And I remember even passively sending a couple of my clients over the years to self defense classes, not really knowing the difference between the martial arts.
Mhm.
And like a lot of the women who we interviewed in the book, I found it through my children. Technically, my stepchildren. Uh, they're my children.
Sure.
And we had them both in a jiu-jitsu experience, especially the oldest one who was struggling with some behavioral concerns. And I was really impressed right away with how I saw the impact it had on the kids. And but it was just kind of 2 years where I paid for the lessons and just let them benefit from it. And one day they were running women's self defense class at the gym, and I actually hated it. The first one I went to, I was very triggered by it, very kind of felt the instructor didn't get it, but there was one female assistant there who really seemed to, and she remains a friend to this day, and she
Mhm.
was an interviewee for the book, and that made an impression on me, her presence there. So it was probably about another 6 months before I even considered trying another class. And how my son approached it to me was come to one of Micah's classes. And this is Micah Bender, who is my main coach, and I write about him a lot in the book. He'll get you. Like I think
Mhm.
he understands you. And Brendan, my son, was exactly right. And the public class I went to with Micah, I like to say it sucked less. I still wasn't
I know. I love how you say it.
yeah, I still wasn't convinced, but I knew if I was going to get this, it would be through this individual teaching
Right.
me. And I was privileged to embark on the path of private lessons with it at first. And even in that first private lesson, I sat Micah down for about 25 minutes with a, hey, this is trauma. This is how it affects me. This is how it's going to show up for me. But we clicked immediately, and within 3 lessons, I just loved how my body felt doing,
Yes.
starting to see the evidence of what it was doing in my life. especially as somebody who struggled with a negative belief like I am trapped, that so much of my trauma history was defined by that, and
Yeah.
that could still flare up as a trigger. So literally learning wrist pin trap and roll, getting somebody off of me who was
Yeah.
trapping me, was just wow. I
Right.
no amount of therapy, talk therapy, or even some of the funkier other stuff I do could have really done that,
Yeah.
other than really learning how to use body leverage. So I knew there was something to this right away, and I started connecting with people like Anna and Micah, and I did a workshop later that year for kind of like a trauma informed jujitsu. And through Anna, I got to meet a lot of really amazing people in the jujitsu world, through Micah too, and some of my other friends. And I think you know this, John, from your experience, a really cool group of people.
Yes, yes, totally unique of themselves, but open-minded for the most part. And thank you for sharing all that. I love your story. I love it because, oftentimes I forget. I was like a fish to water with it. It immediately sort of filled this insatiable need. And then plus some. And I'm so thankful, like you stuck with it. Like 2 months later, you went back and you tried again, and it really does speak to, and you detail this so much in the book too, about finding the appropriate academy and coach for you, and that connection is so important. So I love that you share all of those things, all of those tenets. I want to switch gears a little bit, because I'm so fascinated by this. And again, you have your Ph.D, you're so trauma informed, and you work with so many people, but you're very eclectic, I'll say. You touched on that you grew up dancing and that you loved expressing yourself that way, but even now you've authored a book on that, healing through dancing, and it's something you also continue to practice, right?
Yes, I have a very active expressive arts practice. And by
Mhm.
definition, expressive arts mixes the different creative forms. So it brings in some dance, some visual art, some writing, music, dramatic. So I like to say on every day, I'm practicing at least something
Okay, wow.
in the creative forms for myself personally, because it just feels good for my soul, and feels good to get things out. And those are some of the most fun workshops that I get to teach in my world.
I love it. Well, I love that your therapy seems to be so holistic. It's body, mind, it's spirit, and trauma it manifests in so many different ways, and for all of us, right? And it's not just something like, we don't just wear a sign on our forehead. Sometimes we don't even know we're feeling pain. And I love that your willingness, and you're so open to find these different ways to express that. I think it's so healthy, and the connectedness to the body and stuff. I love it. How is that in contrast to your other therapies, like EMDR? Did I say that correctly? EMDR?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, for listeners who are not aware, I always like to give the little elevator pitch on what EMDR is. It stands for eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. And that is actually a very holistic therapy itself. If people know about it, they usually have heard of it as the rapid eye movement therapy that helps the brain to rewire how traumatic memories are stored. But even the founder of that therapy practiced meditation, practiced yoga, uh,
Wow.
just had a lot of connection and what we do in EMDR really has a lot of connection to indigenous practices and emphasis on rhythmic drumming and storytelling and silence. And so I just think talk therapy and talk can have its place and can be very important. Like we're talking right now, we're using
Yeah.
talk to connect through conversation. So talk is not the enemy, but I think anybody who has healed in any meaningful way realizes talk is not enough,
Hmm.
because you can talk about what happened to you over and over again, and it may not necessarily transform for you, because the way that traumatic memories are stored in the brain exists at a level below words.
Hmm.
So it might be something like getting in there and painting a picture that helps you to shift it, learning how to get someone off of you in a wrist pin that does it.
Yes.
uh, it can vary for different folks, but I think the key part of my teaching is we have to be creative with how we help people to shift it.
I love it. And I love those merits, and I love that about your practice too, because I identify so much with it personally. I mean, I had tons. I still participate. Let me say that in talk therapy. I share that very openly. I see a therapist via telehealth every other week, and we'll continue to do so. And that's great. But for me, my magic was jujitsu. And I also want to honor for other people, it may not be jujitsu, but that was my magic. There was that, your word, I think, that link. There was a link, and there was so much through it. Just the bonding it took of taking care of a partner and vice versa, and just growth of getting better, and or feeling your body, getting into a squat position, like, oh my gosh, I haven't done this in a long time. All those were just, it was great. And I grew from all that. But I also think that people could do it through dance or whatever. I do think the body needs to participate. So I love your practice.
And magic may differ from person to person, but I
Yeah.
think at the end of the day, that's what my work is about, is helping people find what that magic is for them.
Mhm. Can I switch gears a little? I mean, it's certainly linked with trauma. I'm sure. I'm not a professional, and that's my big disclaimer. I tell everyone I am not a doctor, but I always share my kind of feedback and experiences with anyone that's willing to listen. But you're also, you work a lot with addiction, and as an addiction therapist, you said yourself that you've been sober for a number of years. So congratulations. I don't recall that
19,
number. I'm
19,
sorry.
19 years.
19 years. Amazing. You need to do something huge for your 20th.
It's coming up in
Yeah,
July. Yeah.
that's amazing. You need to definitely do something. But anyway, I say that to say that you've also authored a few books about, healing throughout the 12 step process in these things. And I would love the link. I mean, I know a lot of the folks in the jiu-jitsu community are sober, or they struggle sometimes. And it's something that I think we're very open to talk about mental health in our community and stuff. But I have an expert on the line here, and while I have you, I want to pick your brain. So I guess just can you maybe share a little bit more about your practice as it relates to that, and I guess a high level.
So there's a lot of different ways to understand addiction. It's one of the most hotly debated issues, even in the mental health addiction arena, even in terms of what we call it. Like, is addiction
Mhm.
a proper word these days, or should we be referring it more to like as a person with a substance use disorder?
Mhm.
Uh, so there's just so many different ways professionals have of understanding it, and what I'm giving you is really a synthesis of a lot of what I've studied combined with a lot of what I've experienced.
Mhm.
And fundamentally, addiction offers us a path to make ourselves feel better after a horrendous experience. And for a lot of us, it's a very complicated childhood where things compound and compound and compound. And one of the words I think that's very important for anybody interested in this work to understand is dissociate, because dissociating is a part of the trauma phenomenon, and it
Mhm.
just means to sever or to separate. And we can think of dissociation as zoning out, checking out, being here but not here. And when you're a kid growing up in a lot of traumatic experiences, you get very good at doing that with your imagination, with just kind of your brain processes to not feel things so strongly in the present moment. When substances enter the picture, for a lot of us, it's in our early teens or preteens, uh, it's like it enhances our ability to dissociate. It helps us get there quicker. And it's often a lot of reinforcing behaviors that can do that too, like gambling or just anything that causes the dopamine release.
Mhm.
And so for many of us, addiction starts out as something we're exposed to rather innocuously, and we get this sense of, wow, that makes us feel good, in a life that really doesn't.
Mhm.
And there's a lot of understanding and debate about, is it something one's genetically predisposed to or not. And I think it's both for a lot of people, that some of us do have the hardwiring that runs in the family.
Sure.
Yet the more and more I've seen and studied and experienced through people in the years, trauma is really at the heart of so much of addiction. Maybe
Mhm.
not all, but I would ballpark it at about 99%. And
Wow.
even for the 1% of people who don't really have a lot of trauma in their history who develop addiction, they probably have exposed themselves to some kind of trauma or wounding through their addictive processes. So
Sure. Yeah, makes sense.
one way or another, it's involved. And so for those of us who seek substances, it's really the body's way to just want to feel good in a life that doesn't.
Mhm.
And I do not shame people for going down that path because of what causes so much of it. Yet, like, my first mentor really helped me to see, now that you know that, and now that you
Mhm.
know it's causing problems in your life,
Mhm.
what's the plan here to help you learn a different way for
Mhm.
being in the world? And I was grateful that I started to find that path rather young. I was 23 when I got sober.
Yeah.
And I believe it gave me it's still a challenging life, yet
Yeah.
I mean, I have life because I often say I don't think I would have made it to 25 if I
Yeah.
didn't get sober when I did.
Well, let me ask this for anybody who is struggling, or maybe not struggling, maybe they're functioning, but they're considering sobriety or whatever. What would you say to that person about your life now? Like, hey, you still live life, you still have fun. Like on the other side of this, your life isn't over. Fun isn't over, maybe.
I think I have more fun, honestly.
Really? You see, I love to hear that. I mean, and I believe you. So it's, yeah, how? Yeah.
Because I have a lot of people in my family and friendship circles who drink, and I'm often at social events where I see them partake, and again, I really not try to cross that line of judging them for doing it, but
Sure, of course.
I almost feel this sense of like, wow, I'm going to remember this the next day, and this is great.
Yeah.
the,
Yeah.
the fun I had. And I think so much of what my early recovery work through therapy and some meetings really instilled in me is that I I did so much of that because I didn't feel I was good enough to be with people and
Mhm.
interact with the world.
Yes.
And I'm still developing, although I've largely developed the confidence now to be like, hey, I'm an okay person even without this. And
Mm.
if you folks who drink don't like me because I don't drink, I will find others who appreciate me because I don't. And
Yeah.
I will say to anybody who is struggling almost 20 years down the road now, I still have fun. I think I have more fun.
Mhm.
And I believe life is full, especially because I have life, because I was that drinker and that user who was really teetering with not being here if I would
Right.
have continued where I was going.
Yeah. God bless you. I mean,
Thank
do you
you.
feel like, I guess, let me ask this too. So for you, in your personal experience, how did you, when you decided to become sober, was it traditional 12-step programs? Is how you embarked on that journey?
Well, I think it's an interesting story. I found 12-step recovery when I was working in Europe with teaching English after the war in Croatia. And
Mhm.
my first exposure to any kind of recovery was translating a recovery meeting for someone else. And that
Wow.
woman became my mentor and sponsor. I was not a professional translator, but
Fortuitous, maybe.
yeah,
Wow.
oh, it was totally a God thing. It was
Oh,
put in the right place. Because at the time, I moved to Europe trying to find myself. And I was in that classic place of, hey, I know I have a problem with drugs, but I think I could still drink. And I did that. But of course, eventually it led me back to drugs. And there was just something about this woman I met, Janet, who I liked her. I knew she would probably help me understand the link between the two. And so, yes, she did work with me primarily through a 12-step model initially. However, she was very trauma informed in the way she did it. She was also the first individual I ever met who validated what I had experienced in my life as trauma.
mm,
So I think, and one of my other books is called Trauma in the 12 Steps, and it's about
mhm.
how we can work 12-step programs in a more trauma responsive way. And I wish anybody coming into a 12-step program could have an experience like I had with Janet. Just like I wish anybody coming into a jiu-jitsu academy could have an experience like I had with Micah. That
Yeah.
instant, wow, this person really kind of gets it and they're able to break it down for me in a way that someone like me could understand it.
Right. Right.
And after 2 years of a lot of 12-step work, then of course I entered trauma therapy. That's how I got involved as an EMDR patient first
Oh, interesting.
before learning to teach it. Yeah, because at 2 years sober, I was clean and sober and doing well overall, but was still struggling with a lot of mental health issues.
Hmm.
So
Of
I
course.
do think it for me and for most people I've seen on a recovery path, it takes a combination of factors to
Mhm.
help us get where we want to go, but then to continue the growth
Of
over the year.
course.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah,
Let me ask it, and this is maybe a crazy question. So, like,
I like crazy questions.
okay, I mean, it's a crazy question, but I feel like there's a part of I don't know. I've never been through 12-step, right? And I've never think by the grace of God, I've never had any real addiction issues. Maybe, maybe, but not, anyway, maybe, but anyway, I say that I've certainly had it in my family and to my loved ones to as severe as it could possibly be in these scenarios. So I'm informed in that manner, but I guess what I've learned from them, I just say that to say on the perception and in trying to be always empathetic and understanding is that one thing I've admired so much about people who become sober is like, I feel like they relinquish like control, like in a level, like even if it's destructive, like there's control, there's still a choice in feeling good. And it seems like, I don't know. And to go through that unknown, and it's more than just the withdrawals and the physical pain, but 2 years later, you still have to unpack and understand and find yourself. This is like normal, like stuff for most people, but then you have an element of like the addiction and the trauma stuff. So it's not more difficult, but it's a different journey for than most, I would say, right? But I admire them. I'm like, man, they gave up such control and they went into that unknown. How do you, and this is the crazy question. So how do you encourage people, or is there advice, or is there something you would offer them as insight as to how they can like circumvent that? Is it finding jujitsu or a dance there? Is it something like that to help replace?
It's a great question, and inspired by the idea that everybody needs to find their own magic. And there's
Mm-hmm.
a lot of things that can do it for folks. The common denominator I see with healing from addiction are two things. One is finding some meaningful lifestyle change.
Right.
And even that was some of the work I did in my in my graduate program, was looking at what do different recovery paths have in common.
Mm-hmm.
And whether you're devoting to, that's why I love the hashtag jujitsu lifestyle, BJJ lifestyle, because it is a
Yeah.
lifestyle. And in the book,
Yeah.
we talk about the Valenti Brothers 753 code, which is an amazing path for living.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that can do it for people. For some folks, the 12-step path gives them a new lifestyle that they can follow. So I think that is one element of it. And then the other element of it is find a way to feel your feelings without shame.
Mm-hmm.
Because the longer I do this work, I'm convinced it is not our feelings that cause us problems. It's everything we do to try to avoid feeling them.
Yeah.
What,
Wow.
what we
Wow.
drink, what we do to avoid, and sometimes over exercising can do that. Like I just don't want to feel feelings. I don't want to feel.
Exactly. Like for me, that's a very easy thing, but and it's never been healthy for me. But
Yeah.
definitely, yeah.
To you and to anybody who identifies as male listening to this, where I think it could be an even harder road for men is you're socialized that feelings are bad.
Yeah, it's yeah, certainly. Like it's getting better, but my generation, I'm 39,
Right.
100%. You're a
Mhm.
crybaby. Rub dirt on it. These things like,
And up,
yeah,
yeah.
you did not express yourself in those ways. It was not okay, you know.
Mhm.
Yeah, a lot of repression for sure. Yeah.
So it's whatever it is that's gonna help you feel those feelings through, and if that's finding a safe person, safe enough people to do that with, find those people, and that could be through therapy, that could be through friends you meet with jujitsu, maybe a combination.
Mhm.
So yes, making a decision to get sober, to change your life, to correct a behavior, whatever it may be, is hard.
Yeah.
There's a lot of grief that can come with it. There's a lot of giving up of your old life.
Right.
But I have inevitably found you actually end up gaining more control over your life when
Mhm.
you can surrender to what you don't know.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, for sure. Amazing. So you specialize in addiction, you specialize in trauma, EMDR, you've authored many, many books. I mean, I don't know how many, several. Um, what else part of your practice have I missed? Have I hit all the highlights? Have I missed anything else that there's kind of a centralized focus?
Well, you remind me of my younger son who also practiced jujitsu. He said to me once, Jamie, how many jobs do you have? Because I count like nine.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
so But for me, that this what brings them all together is facilitating transformative experiences for people.
Mhm.
And as a therapist, I just knew very early on that I had to give people a lot of options because as somebody who's a pretty multifaceted, multi-layered person myself,
Mhm.
I always have, well, it's funny, I say always a lot. Through my life, even as I've struggled, I've needed to challenge myself in some way.
It's so funny you said that. I was walking my dog this morning and I was thinking about today's conversation and I was like, I had two thoughts, but I was like, I don't know if I'll ask her this or not, but I was like, I wonder if she was always like this overachiever. I mean, you've
Well,
done a lot, you've accomplished a lot. Like, were you so, and that doesn't mean like you're perfect. No one's perfect. No one, but were you someone at like 25, your parents were like, oh, yeah, for sure. Like, I saw her just doing all this stuff. Like,
well, here's what's interesting, and I share this when I share my recovery story. I was valedictorian in my high school class.
I knew it.
I did, but overachieving in high school is very much an addiction for me. I would go as far as to say it was my first addiction because it's like if I could win this, if I could have straight A's,
Mm,
if I could get everybody's adulation, that would make up for the fact that I really didn't like myself
mm,
deep down, and it kept my parents and some of their issues off my back, and it became something I hid behind once drugs and alcohol entered the picture. Because something I'd hear a lot was, "Oh, you're too smart to
okay.
do that." And we talk about addiction all the time as an equal opportunity destroyer, and that is one of the biggest truths
Mm,
I have heard. And so many of your overachievers develop addiction problems because of the drive, because of the it's never enough, it's never
so
enough.
true.
I
Yeah.
have to keep doing more. I would hope in my recovery that I've learned to transform it to serve me and others, but I
Yeah.
still have to be conscious. I've done some study in Workaholics Anonymous, which is a 12-step fellowship as well, looking at this over tendency to do.
Mm,
And I believe that yes, even though I have done a lot, I still have to stay very diligent about having a rest practice and
mhm.
doing things for myself physically that give me joy. Right now, I'm training for a hike this fall, and I need to be doing that.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's a good question, and thanks for putting it out there. But I will say this, that even though academics and writing and speaking have always come very naturally to me, I have never fancied myself an athlete of any
Mm,
kind. I was that kid who tried my best
yeah.
with softball, with
Yeah.
figure skating, but I kind of had a natural clumsiness to
Mhm.
me. And I love sport. I've loved watching sport. I've loved following it, but that was never my thing, right? And so when I passed my pink belt, it's the women empowered belt through the Gracie
Mhm.
University system. I passed it at 37 years old, and I literally hung the certificate up on the same wall as my PhD.
It's awesome. I love
It
that.
meant the same to me
Oh.
because like a PhD was something I knew I could get,
Mm,
but passing a timed martial arts test at that age, I had a lot of demons come up around that. Like
yeah.
you can't do this. You can't do this. And even though athletics is not my and this is where Anna, my co-author, and I are different because she's
Mhm.
more naturally inclined that way. I always salute the kid who finishes last in the race because at least you finished the race.
Yeah,
And
100%.
you've tried and you've maybe even gotten more out of it
Yes.
than the kids who killed themselves trying to win it. So
Yeah. Awesome. Amazing. And how like I don't know, like how in touch with yourself to know that you need to challenge yourself in those ways, and how much more satisfying, as you said, what must it be afterwards? How much more empowering it is to know that you achieved more. It was that much more extra difficult, and you were able to come through that. So that's awesome. I love that. I love everything about your jujitsu experience. I love that you didn't like it at first. I think it's so great because it's a story that hopefully anybody can identify with. But moreover, you were able to really leave it with such a positive experience. So it's really worth sharing. Thank you so much.
my pleasure. Thanks for
Uh,
asking the question. I guess I like the crazy questions because I like where they take.
yeah. Well, good. I'm glad you liked it because they get crazy. Well, I mean, honestly, I am fascinated by you, and like anybody that focuses in these areas and stuff, because you're a seeker, but you're informed, and you're trying to make the world a better place. At the end of the day, like, you are helping people, and that's really important, and that's a good thing. And I want to learn. I'm always trying to learn myself too, because I learn more about myself through these conversations than ever. It's really crazy sometimes.
Well, I like giving interviews on podcasts because there's usually a light bulb that goes off for me, and I end up writing down a few things afterwards. And hopefully, it speaks to this need we have to let's really talk to each other.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, with that, again, thank you again for finding the time. One final question: where are kind of the best resources for anybody to find you if they have questions or they want to reach out about your work?
For the general public, the website I recommend is called Trauma Made Simple. So just search traumamadesimple.com.
Okay.
It's everything I've done for free that you can get online. I have a pretty active YouTube presence. I have a couple different companies that and projects that I do. You can link them all through
I
Trauma.
will. Yeah.
And if you're on any of the socials, if you just search my name, it should come up on Instagram. I'm at Dr. Jamie M. I know I'm glad we're friends now or follow each
Yes,
other.
I'm gonna link you everything. Yes, I love your content too. Your stories and stuff. You're perfect because you crack me up, and I'm like, yeah. Also, I get that. I agree.
I try to keep it light when I need to, but
Same.
let's just tell a story. Yep.
Yep. Well, thank you again so much. And again, I will attach all of these references and for anybody who's interested. Again, this is True Story with John Gibson. Today's guest, Dr. Jamie Marich.